My name is Ruth Ann Becker. I'm a Senior Vice President at the Mental Health Association here in Westchester. Our administrative offices are in Tarrytown, but we have clinics here in Yonkers, White Plains, Mount Kisco, and then we have a lot of different, and also we've just opened up in Rockland as well now. So we're expanding, but we're a community mental health center. We serve everybody from children to seniors, everybody in between, families, to try to support people with mental health needs. I have the pleasure of overseeing our adult rehab services, which is essentially housing, employment, something called home and community-based services, which are services out in the community. And I also do family support. So the SAFE part of Safe Talk stands for suicide alertness for everyone. And again, we're coming to talk about so that we can help people with thoughts of suicide, and that we can connect them with people who have experience in helping that person. So again, we're not asking people to come to this training and then be able to do an intervention. We're coming here to talk about, can we connect you to people in our community that can and are trained and are qualified to do that. And you'll hear me say that quite a bit, because a lot of times the conversations, I will stop the conversation and say, that's not our role, right? We're the first response. We're the person who calls 911. If we're thinking about a medical model. So we might start CPR, but not necessarily have the expectation that we're going to be able to do more than just calling 911 and starting CPR. So if you just put yourself in that sort of frame of reference, right? So as we're going to practice some scenarios, we're going to talk about this a lot, but the expectation is that you're not getting into the ambulance with somebody who's having a heart problem. You're just waiting until the ambulance comes, okay? Could someone read that for me? Because it's a little bit awkward for me where I'm standing.
We are concerned about the safety of our friends and family members. We want to be more alert to the risk of suicide. We want to respond quickly when someone might be at risk of suicide. Use the steps that this program teaches you and may help save a life.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. This is a tough subject, but suicide is everyone's business.
Right. And so obviously you guys have come to this because you want to know more, or this relates to your work. But I don't know about any of you, but I grew up in a family where we didn't talk about suicide. That just was a taboo topic. No one wanted to even think about it. It was whispered, like how cancer was whispered. Suicide was. It wasn't even mentioned. And I had some really interesting ideas about suicide. So, for example, for me and my family, what I was taught, if someone was in that much pain, then maybe it was okay that that person took their own life. Why should they have to suffer? If they're, they should have the right to be able to take their own life. And then I have a lot of people who I know personally or professionally, or have done these things, say, well, it's really against my religious background, and so it's very taboo to talk about. And even when someone did complete a suicide, it wasn't talked about. So people come with their different opinions about it. So I have a son with very serious emotional problems, and at a very young age, at about 6 or 7, he started to talk about suicide. He wanted to kill himself, and he would talk about it very openly. And as little kids do, they're not ashamed, but he was really struggling in his life even back then, and he didn't want to be unhappy and miserable and sad, and he would talk about suicide all the time. And he would tell me very Mom, I'm gonna open the car door and I'm gonna jump out while you're driving. He had very specific plans, and and so I had to really take a hard look at my own feelings about suicide, because clearly I wanted not only myself to be better prepared, but I also wanted everybody in my child's life to not think it was okay that because he was sad and upset that he, it was okay for him to attempt suicide. So that's how I became interested in the topic. I mean, obviously I've been in the mental health field for 30 years. I have worked with people who have talked about suicide, attempted suicide. In fact, this morning as I was driving in, one of the residents in our program made an attempt. So it's something that's very, very present, but my attitude has changed. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to ask people to sort of put that hat on, that we are willing to do what it will take, except for the fact, and we'll talk about that later, we're not going to put ourselves in danger, right? But we will go to whatever means we can to try to help somebody. Okay, so this is sort of like a representation of our community, and what we're saying here is that not everybody, as I said before, not everybody needs to be that person who's going to help that person work through their feelings of suicide. We're going to be the people who connect the people to that.
Hello.
What? All right. Okay. So one of the really nice things about doing this training is that I have a partner called Hari, and he's an actor, but he is representing the authors, some of the authors' sort of viewpoint of this presentation. And so he is a gentleman who has firsthand experience with suicide and also has a family member who attempted suicide. So he's going to help me do this presentation, and because there's a lot of content, so I'd be sitting here chatting to you all day long, and your eyes would be glazing over. At least, you have someone else to look at.
Hello. I hope you will invite me into your Safe Talk training. I hope to be able to work with your on-site trainer in a way that allows him or her to focus on you and your learning. I will present some parts of this training, and my co-trainer will present others, particularly the interactive parts. Several times I will tell you about some personal experiences with suicide. These experiences are real, but they are not mine. They belong to one of the developers of this program. He wants me to make them as real as possible by treating them as if they were mine. Please allow us the artistic license to help make suicide as real as it is. And now I begin. If you are like me, you know about the costs of suicide all too well. Maybe you experienced a suicide at work, or at school, or even of a media personality who was important to you. Maybe you experienced the loss of someone close to you, as I did, with the death of my father by suicide. You may still be questioning whether you or anyone else could have done anything different. Unfortunately, it is the nature of suicide that some of those questions may always remain unanswered. Safe Talk assumes that all of us here today either have hope or want to have hope that something can be done for persons with thoughts of suicide who are alive now. I invite all of you to join the two of us in looking at ways to be helpful for those who can still be helped. If you find that you can't think about hope or helping others at the moment because you can only think about the person you lost to suicide, please let my co-trainer know. Let me show you in a different way why you might want to become or learn more about being a suicide alert helper. Someone who can connect a person with thoughts of suicide to a suicide intervention caregiver. We are going to show you 3 different and quite short scenes in which something very important doesn't happen. Watch carefully.
Dad, I think I'm gonna quit. The pressure's getting to me. It's just too much. Today.
It's not like you to give in.
Everything will be okay. I just need to get back to the dorm. There's something I have to do.
Are you sure?
Sure.
that last one because it's.
Everything's a mess. The kids are skipping school. My job is gone. It's hard to get to the store, to church. I think I could get you some transportation help. Everything is closing in. No space. No privacy, cooped up here, no place to go. I can't take it anymore. Things will feel better once it becomes easier for you to get out and get some things done. You're right. I shouldn't complain. Things will be better.
Are you alert to the possibility that something else might have been done in each of these situations? You may have sensed the possibility that one person in each of these scenes might be thinking about suicide, and that the other person did not appear to recognize that possibility. You may also recognize yourself as being either or both of these people in the past. Your suspicion about something being missed doesn't need to be certain knowledge at all. Just a hunch, even a funny feeling that the possibility of suicide is not being recognized. If you are aware of that possibility at any level, you have the ability to become suicide alert. In attending this training, you are indicating that you want to be the kind of person who wants to become suicide alert. After all, it can be unpleasant to be aware of the possibility of suicide and not know what to do about it. Safe Talk invites you to notice when suicide may be present, accept that any possibility of suicide is serious, and learn how to connect a person with thoughts of suicide to other help.
Any thoughts, comments? Obviously some of the scenarios can be pretty stilted, because they're trying to prove a point, but they are trying to prove a point. We have conversations like this with people all the time where we know something is off, but we don't necessarily want to ask. And I'm going to talk a lot later on about being nosy and how culturally that is challenging for us. So just think about that as we go through this.
Let us look at it another way. Studies tell us that in any given 2-week period, 1 in 20 people, or 5% of the community, are thinking about suicide. Thus, at least one of these people, and it could be any of them at any given moment, is very likely to be thinking about suicide right now. The potential for thoughts of suicide is part of being human. While people with life skills and personal connections might be less likely to have thoughts of suicide, no one is perfectly safe from them. Almost anyone can have thoughts of suicide, but while the potential for thoughts of suicide cannot be prevented, suicidal acts, doing something that may result in injury and death, can be. The people who are thinking about suicide in this picture are still thinking about suicide, not yet acting upon those thoughts. There is good reason to assume that they are still in this picture. Most people thinking about suicide are not sure that they want to injure themselves, and indeed, the vast majority never do. Most want help in staying alive. Because they want this help, almost all people thinking about suicide, either willingly or unconsciously, invite others to recognize that they are thinking about suicide.
So, you might be wondering if someone is thinking about suicide and they want to kill themselves, why would they let somebody know that they're thinking about suicide?
Because they want help.
Because they want help, right, exactly. That there's a part of them that still wants to be helped, but they don't necessarily know how to ask, and that's why we're gonna learn how to really ask people about suicide and about their thoughts about suicide. also another, way for us to think about this is that the life force in all of us is very, very strong. So the desire to die by suicide is often in some type of internal struggle. A person's in this struggle. They're thinking about it, they're having thoughts, they may even have a plan, they might be thinking about how life will be better without them, and that it would be easier for their family and friends. They might be even getting to that point. But what we do know is that there are often ways in which people are letting us know. And those, those cues in those two conversations, those two people were waiting for that person to ask, and we're gonna talk about that. So, I also like to talk at this point about the fact that many of us who know people who have completed a suicide, it's very hard to accept the fact that I may have missed something along the way. And we do know that there are certain people who, have an impulsive, the thought comes in, they respond, especially young people, right, especially who are impulsive, or perhaps people who have been drinking or on drugs. They don't have the same ability to sort of stop themselves from doing an impulsive act. So even though we talk a lot in this presentation about the fact that there's almost always an opportunity for us to do some type of intervention and to reach out and to ask if someone is thinking about suicide, we also have to accept the fact that there are those cases where there were no signs. And so when I go around the state and I'm doing this presentation, I'm also often, I can see people getting very upset about that because they have someone who they love very much, a child, a sibling, a partner, a friend, a very good friend, and that person, and they can't really deal with the fact that there might have been something that they missed. But we have to accept, when we're talking about suicide, that we're all human, and there are all things that are going on in our lives, and that there might, when that person was going through that struggle or sending out those, what we're going to talk about, invitations to have the conversation, we weren't ready, we weren't capable, we weren't in a position to do that. Now, I think after you go through this training, you're going to be much more sensitive to that.
So here is this person, uncertain about suicide, who is either actively telling others that they need help, or at least is unwilling or unable to hide that they are troubled about something. One might assume then that somebody else in this picture would help. After all, they are likely helpful and caring people. But unfortunately, without the kind of things you will learn in this program, their and your chance to help prevent suicide might be missed, dismissed, or avoided. Let's say that many of the 19 did not recognize that there was one or maybe more than one person among them who was thinking about suicide, only discovering that they had a chance to help when it was too late. In other words, many missed the sometimes subtle, but more often obvious hints that a person is thinking about suicide. Among those who recognized that thoughts of suicide were involved, most of this group did not take the thoughts seriously. In other words, they dismissed thoughts of suicide as not really being serious. Of those who took the thoughts seriously, many of this group avoided getting involved because they felt unprepared to help. Safe Talk provides you with alternatives to missing, dismissing, or avoiding suicide. The training will help you get rid of some of the misleading notions that provide reasons to miss, dismiss, and avoid suicide. Instead, it will encourage and support reasons to reach out and help. What an alert helper learns, what you will learn, is how to recognize things that might be connected with suicide and how to ask about thoughts of suicide in a direct and open way. You will also learn some basic things you can do once you know that thoughts of suicide are present. We will talk about what you can do to play a part in keeping thoughts of suicide from becoming injuries and deaths. You will only need to help once to feel that your time here was well spent, you will very likely have a chance to help and to feel good about helping many more times than that. There was a time in my life when having more suicide alert helpers might have made a big difference to me. You, could have gotten me to help sooner and ease the pain of struggling with suicide alone. Obviously, I won that struggle, but I would have been very grateful to anyone alert to my need for help sooner than I got it.
Okay, so the talk part in the Safe Talk is twofold. One is we want to be able to get people to talk openly and honestly about suicide and feel comfortable with that. But the talk is really the model that we're going to use to be able to help people and recognize when they need help. So we're going to talk about each of the letters, the T, the A, the L, and the K, and we're going to start off with the T. So we got the T for tell, the A for ask. Let's just see if it's going to work out.
There you go.
Yep, there you go, okay. L for listen, and the K for keep safe. And that's gonna be the different steps that we're gonna now start to go over. Then after we go over all the steps, we're gonna take a short break, and then we'll have an opportunity to practice it. Okay.
Tell is also a reminder to any of us who have thoughts of suicide that we should tell someone in the most direct way we can. If you've been thinking about suicide recently, now is a good time to decide whom you will tell. Someone who will take you seriously and will help. And what is the soonest possible time when you can tell them? Make a mental note of your decision. If you can't decide whom to tell about your thoughts of suicide, you can tell my co-trainer, or our community support resource at the break, or write it on your feedback. Make sure to include a way we can get in touch with you. Just because it is not said directly and openly does not mean that persons with thoughts of suicide are not telling us about their thoughts of suicide in other ways. Let me emphasize that virtually everyone who has had thoughts of suicide told someone, in one way or another, and likely many people about their thoughts of suicide before they acted upon them. The person who suicides without ever doing anything that might hint at that possibility is very, very rare.
Okay, so why do we think that some people are reluctant to talk about or tell somebody that they're thinking about suicide?
Shame.
Shame, exactly.
They don't want to be a burden.
Don't want to be burdened, exactly. Anything else? Maybe they've told somebody before and they didn't get a good response, right? I know in my world, in the mental health field, our clients will tell us all the time that they are very reluctant about telling somebody that they have thoughts of suicide, because what's going to happen to them? 911 is called and they're sent to the hospital. So after the first or second time of that happening, you learn to keep your mouth shut, right? And so at my agency, we've really had to really change our practice and policies around suicide, because we want people to be able to talk about and get the help before there's actually an attempt. A lot of people who work in hospitals or school settings or have very, very strict protocols, and they must call 911 and they must do that. I'm not suggesting that through this presentation that anybody do anything that goes against the protocol of where they work, but I do think that after going through this, you might want to have a conversation with your team or your supervisor about the fact that if we have this hard and fast rule that if someone is thinking about suicide, 911 must be called and there's going to be reaction. It really teaches everybody that not to talk and to keep quiet. If we can develop a protocol that people are allowed to talk about, and then we assess for how lethal that person's thoughts are, what they're thinking, then maybe we don't have to do that. We can connect people to the right types of support that keep them out of the hospital. So you know, there are reasons. What about, if they tell, you know, if you tell somebody at work and then that person tells their supervisor, it might jeopardize that person's job. They might have to take a leave of absence. You know, people start to think, well, if I ask this question and if I ask somebody about this and they're, then I'm gonna have to do something. So I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut because I don't wanna put them in a position. Obviously, we have the stigma associated with suicide, the shame that you had mentioned before. Lots of people are afraid they're gonna lose custody of their children. And that is a reality for some people. That has happened. So, you know, people really, you know, are very reluctant to tell people. Any other thoughts about, one of the ones that they're afraid to seem weak. They want to seem like they got it. It's hard to, you know, for men it can be challenging. For different cultures it can be challenging to show any type of weakness around their emotional state. So they'll bury that and they won't talk about it.
Tell then has a number of meanings. First, it reminds all of us that we are human, and that if we were to have thoughts of suicide, we should tell someone about them. Second, it reminds us that a person with thoughts of suicide is almost always trying to tell us that they have these thoughts. Tell also suggests to us that they are inviting us to tell them that we recognize that they want help. What we see, hear, sense, and learn about from them makes us think about the possibility of suicide. We call these invitations as a way to remind us that they expect a response. Just as with every other kind of invitation, we at least need to say no. For a help me with suicide invitation, no is not something that you will want to do, especially once you know what to do. We are much more willing to accept invitations when we have reason to expect a positive outcome.
So, okay. So you might be wondering if someone is willing to give us these tells, these invitations to be asked about suicide, that they're not as serious about suicide, or that maybe they're attention seeking or trying to, they're not, you know, they're less likely to do it. And the truth of the matter is that that is not true at all. Just because someone is sort of putting it out there and hoping someone will do it, they can be just as serious. Just as in the alternative, someone who might not even ever talk about their suicide, you know, is no more serious about wanting to complete suicide than someone who does put these invitations out. So what we're going to learn through this again is that regardless of how this person is talking about it, we're going to start asking questions about it.
Tell then have.
Okay, so so what might some of these invitations look like? Like, what are some of the things that we might be seeing? So one of them is care less, right? So and that sort of encompasses quite a few things. It might encompass caring less about their personal appearance, right? It might be that they're more careless in their life, so drinking more, using drugs more, driving fast, sort of tempting fate, right? Not taking care of their home, not taking care of their children. So you'll start to, you know, you can, those are sometimes the invitations. Moody, withdrawing, alcohol and drug misuse, are all things that are actions that we can see that a person's behaving differently than they may have. So again, it might not be that someone's saying something to you, but they're acting in a certain way that is sort of like, this isn't my friend, this isn't my kid, something's not going, something's wrong here. Something is, you know, making me uncomfortable. And these are things that people will say. I'm feeling very alone. I'm feel like a burden, like we talked about before. I don't have a purpose. I need to escape. And again, they might not come out and say it like that, but again, there's going to be like, you know, when you're talking to the person, you're going to sense that that these are the things that by saying these things, what their meaning is. It could mean that they're just having a bad day, or that they have thoughts of suicide. We just don't know, and we have to ask more questions. Feelings that we're sensing, that they're desperate, that they're hopeless, that they're numb, that they're ashamed. There's something in the way that they're acting that is making us pick up on these emotions. And of course, there's life situations that are going on in a person's life. Abuse, rejection, losses, suicide. One that I would add is transition. They're going, you know, they've lost a job, they've come out of the military, they've a loss of a loved one, they've moved, you know, all of these situations. They have a family member or a friend or someone close to them who has completed or attempted a suicide. It can also be something that causes other people to think about it, right? We see that in schools, one child, you know, maybe a high school student, and then another one, and then another one. And so, and again, we think like, oh, those are like copycats, or just that person was in an environment where there was a lot of stuff going on, and they saw that person, you know, may have solved their problems by suicide, so now they're going to attempt that as well. Divorce, absolutely, huge, right? So yeah, so we're going to see actions, we're going to hear, we're going to sense, we're going to learn about the different life situations when we're talking to people.
You have depression up there.
What?
Depression. Sorry,
Yeah.
depression.
Yeah, you know, we know that obviously there's a connection between depression and suicide, but we also know that there are times in which people say they didn't even know that the person was depressed or going through a hard time. For these kinds of presentations, we try to stay away from the diagnosis and more to the what's the behavior or the action, because again, this is often done with community members who, they'll start to use that as an excuse to not have a conversation. Well, I'm not qualified to know whether or not this person's depressed or not. But are you qualified to know that your friend is sad, that your friend is having a hard time? Yes, most likely. We want to be careful in presentations like this to make sure that we don't make people feel that they have to be a mental health professional or have an experience or be a social worker or be any of those things to be able to have these difficult conversations with people, which ultimately we're going to find that are not that difficult, because we're going to give you an actual script on what to say and how to say it, and that really sort of reduces everybody's anxiety about, am I going to say the wrong thing, am I going to say the right thing?
So this list of common invitations does not include everything that might be an invitation. Human beings are creative. Having thoughts of suicide does not change that fact. It might even make one more creative. A person with thoughts of suicide may invite help by doing the most uninviting of things, like getting in trouble, picking an argument with you, etc. A person with thoughts of suicide may invite you to help in ways that are uniquely their own. For example, something is not right if you ever hear me say something negative about my mother-in-law. Wouldn't it be great if everyone felt safe to tell someone that they were thinking about suicide openly and directly? However, you now understand the idea of invitations well, even the less direct ones. You will be able to tell a person what you saw, heard, sensed, or learned about their invitations for help.
So, a lot of times people in this presentation will ask me, well, aren't there groups of people that we should be more alert for? Veterans, for example, and of course that there are. I started the presentation by saying, men under 50, it's the leading cause of death. We know that there's a real issue for our veterans and people in the military and their family members that it's real challenges. But for this presentation, we try to stay away from like grouping people about, oh, these people are more likely or these people are less likely, for exactly the reason that we talked about before. We don't want to have you, we don't want you inside your head thinking, oh no, she's a woman in her 20s. That's not a group that, often, completes suicide, so it's probably nothing that I have to worry about. Or this is a woman in her 80s and has lived a very full and happy life, so clearly she wouldn't be thinking about it. So we try to stay away from grouping people. There's a, I'm sorry? Yes, the cops. Yes, the cop, yes, the police officers, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. This book does not want to stay on. Yeah. So even though we're aware in our communities that there are certain communities, and we want to make sure that those groups of people are getting the support and attention. It's so sad when you see something of like the police officers and you're aware that so many police officers are dealing with these struggles, first responders also, in general. So we want to make sure that they're getting specialized treatment because, of course, for all the reasons we talked about before, the stigma, the taboo of it, the shame of it, the inability to, they're worried they'll be taken off the job, what will happen to their families. There's so many reasons not to talk about it.
The best way to tell the person with thoughts of suicide that you have been paying attention to their possible invitations is to ask directly about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? The A of TALK stands for ask and refers to asking directly about thoughts of suicide. I know that when I was at risk, I thought I was telling everyone I knew about it in my own way. It wasn't until someone asked me about my thoughts of suicide in a direct way that I was finally able to talk about what I so wanted to talk about in a direct way.
So, before we just really move into the ask phase about it, I just want to make sure that I cover the part that people often will say to me, well, I don't want to ask about suicide because it might put it in their mind, right? We've heard that, everybody's heard that, like, well, if I bring it up to them, then maybe they'll start thinking about it. And so let's say, I'm sorry, your name again?
Agnes.
Agnes. If I said to Agnes, that's a really beautiful necklace, will you give it to me? It's not gonna all of a sudden make her think like, oh, I should be giving my necklace away. We can't put, thoughts into someone else's head. If I ask her for her necklace, she's not gonna just hand it up, over. Just like if someone is thinking about suicide and we ask them, then we're gonna try to get them help. If we ask someone who's not thinking about suicide, they're not gonna go home and think, oh, Agnes mentioned to me that, if I was thinking about suicide, maybe I should put that on the list of things, things to think about. It doesn't work that way. And we have to get comfortable with that notion because I hear it over and over and over and over again. And we're all nodding our head, yeah, we understand it, we get it. But I'm telling you, you will be sitting with somebody and your gut is telling you that someone is thinking about suicide and you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to bring it up. Maybe they're not thinking about it. I'm going to tell you that when you talk about suicide and when you bring it up to somebody, if they're not thinking about it, they're going to say, oh my God, no, absolutely not. I'm not thinking about that at all. They're not going to get, not talk to you ever again. They're going to know that you care about them. And that's the experience that people talk about all the time. Does that make sense to people that, that we're not going to put that in their head? Because that's really important as we go through this. One of the things that I found really fascinating about learning about this was that that the people who have survived a suicide attempt talk about, like, they wish someone would have spoken to them, or they're not sorry that someone intervened. They're so thankful that they're still alive. And we're talking about people who, because they did some type of act, they might have, they might be injured because of that, or they might have long-lasting effects of that suicide attempt. They still are like, I'm so grateful to the person who saved me, who found me, who stopped me, who prevented me, who made the call to 911. So we just want to go through that, go through this with that kind of mind frame. So again, one of the things that cause us to either dismiss, or ignore someone's conversation is that we feel like somehow they're going to get in trouble, right? That somehow by asking them and talking about it is going to put them in a compromising position. And we do know that there are, sometimes you are talking to someone and the only place to keep them safe is a hospital, or they need temporarily to be away from their children. So again, there are some reasons that we might be hesitant to ask about it, but we have to push through our own feelings that this person's going to have some negative effects to the fact that this is about saving people's lives, bottom line, and we have to do whatever it takes to help to save someone's life, even if there are temporarily some negative effects.
The best way for you to tell the difference between a person thinking about suicide or not thinking about suicide is to ask if suicide is connected with what you have seen, heard, sensed, or learned about. Whatever it is that caused you to think suicide might be involved could just be the way the person is, or it could be related to some other problem that they might want help with and not related to suicide at all. No one's awareness is perfect and no list is complete. That is why you have to ask. Let's watch how easily this can be done. These scenes are also brief, so watch carefully.
Dad, I think I'm gonna quit. The pressure's getting to me. It's just too much. Today.
It's not like you to give in.
Everything will be okay. I just need to get back to the dorm. There's something I have to do.
Something about the way you say that doesn't seem right. Please, tell me what's going on.
I just can't stand up to them, Dad. I've had it with these guy games, and I'm so ashamed of not being able to deal with them. I just have to end it.
You sound overwhelmed. Are you thinking about suicide?
Yes.
Everything's a mess. The kids are skipping school. My job is gone. It's hard to get to the store, to church. I think I could get you some transportation help. Everything is closing in. No space, no privacy, cooped up here, no place to go. I can't take it anymore. You sound desperate. I know what I have to do. kill yourself? Because that's what flashed through my mind. You're thinking that suicide is what you have to do, aren't you? Yes. 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 Some days I feel like I can't go on.
Okay, so this slide is sort of the model that we're going to use. Sometimes when people are missing work, worrying about things, and withdrawing from friends and family, they are thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? I love this because it really, and I'm going to give you a card with it on it. We're going to practice this a million times until this just comes out very naturally. But you are going to be looking for the things that you've noticed, their behavior, their the things, you know, what you're sensing from them, and you're going to include that in this description. And then you are going to ask straight out, are you thinking about suicide? Okay? What do you think we're very clear about either saying thinking about suicide or thinking about killing yourself? Any thoughts on that? Direct. Very direct, right? It's not, because we tend to be much more comfortable with euphemisms like, are you thinking of doing something to yourself? Are you thinking about, sometimes something silly, something stupid? Are you thinking about, you know, just using terms that don't really invite the person to say that they are thinking about killing themselves? If you're saying to them, you know, if you're thinking about, are you thinking about doing something stupid, right? And I've said it, you know, I'm guilty of it, because you're like, oh my goodness, you know, you want to, like, you can't imagine that this person is at that place in their life. But we want to make sure that we're using terms. There's another reason also that we use the words suicide or killing yourself. It's because we want them to know that we can hear the word, that we can hear this, and we can have this conversation. If we seem uncomfortable with having the conversation, they will seem uncomfortable about having this conversation. And if you find yourself in that situation, this is a really good sort of test. If you can't say the words, are you thinking of killing yourself, are you thinking about suicide, then you need to find someone who can. And it may be because it's a parent, right, or a child, or a superior in some way, or, you know, the power dynamics are such that you're not used to having those kinds of conversations with that person. But so if you're sensing all these things, that this person's in a desperate spot, if they're, you know, they're having a really hard time, you want to make sure that you can get someone who can actually say those words to them. Again, I can't say this enough. If a person's not thinking about suicide, they'll say, I am not thinking about suicide. And there is also the reality that people will not be honest. And the truth, you can go through a million trainings like this, and the ASSIST training, which is the next level, where you learn about interventions that you can do, and that person will still kill themselves. So, you know, we have to accept that even if we do everything right and say the right thing and do it the right way and have the right script and bring out the card and have all the right resources, there is still going to be some people who have, you know, maybe, you know, they just so committed to the idea, or you got to them too late, or you know, whatever it is, and that we can't always save everybody when they're thinking about it. But trust me, having the conversation and opening this up for conversation and allowing people to talk about their feelings about this should, you know, not should, does really prevent people from killing themselves.
So first, you keep your eyes, ears, and other senses open. Be aware of what is going on around you. When you see, hear, sense, or learn things that might be possible invitations, ask directly about thoughts of suicide. As you can see, there is another advantage to naming invitations and then asking about suicide. It communicates the things that you have seen, heard, sensed, or learned about that are causing you to ask at the same time as you are asking. It is not just a question you are asking from out of the blue. You have reasons for asking that you share at the same time as you ask. And if they answer yes to your direct and open question about thoughts of suicide, what then? Don't worry. It is not difficult to respond to this now obvious request for help. The person with thoughts of suicide almost always wants to talk about why suicide has come into their life. I certainly did. For me and for them, someone has finally taken up their invitation, provided an opportunity for them to talk directly and openly about suicide. Guess what the L stands for in talk? That's right, listen. And we mean just that. You don't need to convince them to live, find the magic key, or solve all or any of the problems that cause them to think about suicide. Almost all persons with thoughts of suicide have not fully decided that they want to die. Indeed, most have not even decided that they don't want to live. Instead, they want to talk to somebody about not wanting to live. Let me say that again. Instead, they want to talk to somebody about not wanting to live. That is certainly what I wanted. The typical situation is even more encouraging than that. Persons with thoughts of suicide, more often than you might think, can talk themselves out of acting on their thoughts of suicide. If they just have someone who will listen and keep the conversation going. That doesn't mean that you don't do the next step. It just means that the keep safe step will be easier. You start the listening step this way. Let's talk about this. I am listening.
By talking to somebody and hearing about what's going on with them, we might also later on be able to be able to pass that knowledge on to whoever we're gonna do the keep safe with. So we're gonna talk about that in a few minutes. But once you start listening, you're hearing about their children or their work or their family or other things that because people will tend to say I would kill myself except that my daughter depends on me, or who's going to do babysitting for the grandchild, or how will my family support itself? Because you're going to hear the ambivalence, and later on that's going to be important, right? Because we're going to be able to say, this is Ruth Ann. She's going through a really rough time. She just lost her job. She's feeling really desperate and alone and is really struggling. But she also knows that she has the responsibility to her two children, and that's going to be something that a therapist or a crisis responder is going to be able to build on for the reasons to stay alive. And again, if those are the things that you're interested in learning about, I really, really suggest that you think about attending an ASSIST training, which is like the second part of this, the intervention piece of that. Okay, so the steps are pretty easy. I haven't told you anything that probably isn't more than just common sense, right? That's why I don't get paid the big bucks to do this, because it's pretty, like I said, it's pretty much common sense. So we have to talk about why it doesn't happen. And again, I know we talked a bit about it, but if it's this easy, right, then why isn't it happening more? So this next part is a chance to clear up any issues that might cause you to dismiss, or avoid doing what needs to be done. And you're going to also get a chance to practice being a suicide alert helper.
Knowing what to do is one part of being willing to do what needs to be done. Another, and perhaps more important part, is to free yourself of any misleading ideas that will cause you to dismiss, or avoid suicide. Just before that, let's make sure we are on the same page about the meanings of missing, dismissing, and avoiding. Here are our definitions. Miss, dismiss, and avoid. Normal human processes, aren't they? You can't pay attention to everything in the world. You have to miss and dismiss some, or else you would become overloaded. and many things should be avoided. On the other hand, there are things you don't want to miss, dismiss, and avoid. I know that when I was first feeling down and occasionally thinking about suicide, I didn't even notice it. I missed it. When I first started recognizing that I was having thoughts of suicide, I dismissed them as not serious. Not too much later, I tried to avoid them, except that I couldn't in the evening when I was alone. Just like many others, I had ideas that were untrue or misleading about suicide, and these kept me from recognizing suicide, taking it serious, or regarding it as a life and death issue. But I will always be able to separate the truth from these fictions now.
I think it's really interesting because, until I started to do this training, or I went through the training, I never thought about the person who was feeling those thoughts of suicide and how they might be going through the same process of like minimizing it or dismissing it or trying to avoid it themselves. But that's why, the connection of the listening piece is so important, because, as we said before, when they're talking, they might be getting some clarity. Like, they might say, no, I'm not having thoughts of suicide. And then you do spend some time chatting with them, and you realize, and they start to realize, like, wow, there's been part of me that's been sort of planning to get, to end my life, to kill myself. So I thought that was a really interesting point, and it's not something that's often brought up, even in my own training. So, again, I don't want to, beat this to death, but we know that there is a lot of reasons why people dismiss, or avoid talking about suicide. I'm sorry. You could say that someone might notice an invitation but not recognize that it could be connected to suicide, because suicide just isn't something they are really even aware of as a potential concern. So that's why we have you practice asking, because we'd rather you ask and get an answer of no than to not ask. Invitations mean the person is not serious, so they dismiss it. They dismiss because suicide is so rare. Only certain kinds of people go on to complete a suicide. Only people acting very strangely will actually make an attempt or complete a suicide. And avoid, again, as we talked about before, we don't want to talk about it because we might make it worse. We don't know what to do. We're too scared to help. Don't want to interfere, don't want the responsibility. We might be thinking someone else will know about this or be able to do something about it. Or you have your own troubles, you're overwhelmed yourself, you've had your own thoughts of suicide. So we know that avoiding is often related to fear, right? You're fearful of having the conversation or trying to think about how you're going to help, and so you avoid having the conversation. So, I'm sorry. Okay. So I just want you to think about the avoiding, the dismissing, and the missing when we look at the next two scenarios.
Mom, I think I'm just gonna quit and go home. The panic's getting to me again.
Well, honey, it's not like you to give in to that panic so easily.
Everything will be okay. I just have to get to my apartment. There's something I have to do.
You sure?
Sure.
Okay. So when we think about what just happened, the things that she just missed or dismissed or avoided, you can see in that scenario, and one of the things I like about this particular scenario is that it's a common, those are common phone calls that moms get, or siblings get, or partners get, like going through a rough time. And maybe this person's gone through a rough time a bunch of different times. So what makes this time different? And again, we don't have the context, we don't know what's been going on. She certainly was well dressed, her hair was done, you know, it's not so obvious than the woman who was, you know, disheveled and, you know, that was a more obvious. This mother's on the phone, so, you know, we could imagine how we could be in a scenario of not asking, or a stance of not even listening for it. So let's look at this one.
Mom, I think I'll just quit and go home. Panic's getting to me again.
Honey, it's not like you to give in to those feelings so easily.
Everything will be okay. I just need to get to my apartment. There's something I have to do.
Okay, something about the way you say that just it doesn't sound right.
Please, tell me what's going on. I just can't take it anymore, Mom.
Take what?
Life.
You sound overwhelmed.
Are you thinking about suicide? Yes.
A willingness to be nosy is an important part of being alert, as I suspect you already sensed. The key to justifying being helpfully nosy is your awareness that suicide might be involved. Remember that there was a time when driving while intoxicated and abusing children was not talked about and more or less a private thing. No longer. We also want it to be okay to ask questions about the possibility of suicide. It's okay to listen and watch carefully. In essence, I want you to assume, until proven otherwise, that anything might be connected to suicide. Because human beings are social creatures, we all have the capacity to read other people to some degree. Thus, we are all able to recognize when others are concerned about something, sometimes even when they are not very clear about it. Use that potential. Pay attention to what you see, hear, sense, and learn about. Always be looking for invitations to ask about suicide. You may not see yourself as a person who would be good at something like talk. In particular, it is the listening step that might seem most foreign, but there are ways to keep that concern from stopping you. As I said earlier about the limits to alert listening, you don't need to convince them to live, find the magic key, or solve all or any of the problems that cause them to think about suicide. Just let them release the feelings and energy stored up in their concern about suicide. Say to yourself, it is not my job to literally save their life. My job is to get them in touch with someone who can help them save their own life. Note, I didn't even say that the other person is going to save their life. I said the suicide intervention caregiver would help them save their own life. They can find a way to kill or hurt themselves if they are determined to do so. Ultimately, it is the person's decision. You can be part of the process that helps them to prevent injury or death, but the person with thoughts of suicide ultimately has to do some of the work. So there is nothing magical for you to do in the listening step. But if you still feel you don't know anything about listening or how it helps, just go on to the keep safe step. Keeping the person with thoughts of suicide safe means that other things, like more listening, can be done by someone else.
So has anybody been in a situation where someone has talked to them about having thoughts of suicide? Yeah? Yes? Did you ever think to yourself, like, is there something about you that maybe makes it easier for people to talk to you about things? Like, my kids will say to me, like, Mom, we're going into the supermarket. We're just getting the 10 items that we need and then we're leaving. Don't talk to anybody online. Don't help people with their children. Don't try to engage the homeless man outside who's panhandling into services. We're just getting the 10 items. Or I lived in the city for a long time, and anytime I sat down on a subway or a bus, the person with a mental illness would sit down next to me, and the next thing you know, I'm like, helping that person. I've always been that person, right? On my kindergarten report card, it said, Ruth Ann loves to help John, who definitely had disabilities, button and zipper his coat. I was a born helper. That's what I did, and that was nurtured, for me along the way. But I think that those of us who are interested in this topic, or have people that talk to them a lot, or people seek us out to tell us our problems, there's something about the way that we present ourselves that allows people to talk to us. And so even if you don't imagine yourself that way, there's sometimes the energy that we're giving off allows people to feel comfortable with us. So I just wanted to go over, some non-helpful things that make it difficult for people to talk to us if we're judgmental, angry, negative, panic, advice-giving, and impatient. And if we think back to the woman who was in the trailer, and she was with a younger woman with long hair who seemed to be some type of social worker or case manager or some kind of person in the helping profession. And in the first scenario, if you remember, she went immediately to well, I've got transportation set up for you. This is a big thing for those of us in the field. When we're talking to someone about their thoughts about suicide, we go into what can we do mode, right? I can help you with this, and I can give, this isn't a time for us to do things for other people or suggest, how they can fix their lives. We just are really in a stance of trying to get them to acknowledge that they're thinking and considering suicide. Things that are helpful are being sensitive and caring, direct, calm, non-judgmental, and patient. And I would say our body language is important to be thinking about when we're having these conversations, right? I don't know that my daughter's capable of having a conversation without a cell phone in her hand anymore. At 17, I don't know, I don't know. I love when they're all laying on I have a sectional couch, and her and her friends are all on the couch communicating with each other via text. I'm like, really? This is not good. But it's, we all do it. We're all guilty of it. We have to put down the cell phone. We have to make eye contact. We need to be leaning forward towards people. We need to have our bodies in positions that people feel comfortable in talking to us. We want to invite that. We want to invite the conversation by being inviting ourselves. So this is a short. Oh, I just wanted to go back because I always forget to mention this about the situation with the mom. And I'm surprised no one said it here because everybody says the same thing to me, oh, really? Does it happen that quickly? She's just all of a sudden going to talk about suicide. And in any of the scenarios, it's the same thing. Obviously, we're trying to, move things along, and we sort of cut out a lot of the middle in these scenarios. But the truth of the matter is that it can often happen that fast, and you have to be prepared because when someone has finally had the courage to say to that person, all of these things and the way you're behaving and the way that you're acting and the way that you've been presenting yourself is making me think that you are thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? And the person will answer the question, yes. And often it happens very quickly. I have used this method, I've used those words, and I have found that I get there a lot quicker than, asking open-ended questions or all the things that we're trained to do in the social work or the mental health field. So it can happen very, very quickly. We need to be prepared for that. That's why we give you a resource list. You're not going to be walking around with that resource list, but I am going to be handing out a wallet card, so you'll have all the steps with you. I keep my wallet card with me all the time. Even though I've done this a million times, it's just nice to say. One of the things that I have seen people do is say, and when we practice this, you can feel free to steal this from me, is that I just recently went to a training and I got this card. Let me take out my card and, so we can make sure that I don't miss anything. It's a great prompt to have. All right, so this is a scenario that sort of demonstrates, how to be helpfully nosy.
noticed you watching me, you know.
Well, you seem so troubled and upset.
What if I am? Frankly, it's none of your business.
Okay? Okay.
Not nosy.
I noticed you watching me, you know.
Well, you seem so troubled and upset.
What if I am? Frankly, it's none of your business.
Okay. But, you being troubled and upset and moving up here and saying that, they don't seem to fit.
You don't want to know about this.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I've been thinking about suicide.
I'm serious.
I'm facing prostate surgery. The doc tells me not to worry, but I can't put it off. No one knows. I can't tell my wife. Like, what's the use? I'm thinking that there's nothing else to do but pack it all in.
Worry about surgery, your wife, having to decide soon.
What do I tell my wife? That seems the hardest. I know I have to do something. Oh, I don't know.
There's a lot going on here. We need extra help.
I guess so.
Let me call into transit control. They'll send someone to meet us who can help. Is that okay?
Okay.
So again, you know, the bus driver being nosy and, you know, making that eye contact with him allowed him to have a conversation. Now, of course, we don't know. Maybe this is a gentleman who rides that bus every single day and the bus driver has noticed something. I have a girlfriend who had very, very severe postpartum depression that went undetected for a while. Right after she had the baby, she lost the baby weight within a couple of weeks, and she had a large baby and had gained a lot of weight related to that. When she went in to see the doctor, rather than the doctor seeing that as a sign that something maybe wasn't right, that she wasn't eating and taking care of herself, he complimented her on losing the baby weight so quickly. And you know, maybe in some cases that might have been a very appropriate, you know, response, but for her it was here she was physically showing that she was in pain and having a hard time, and the doctor just completely missed it. She went out into the waiting room, and the receptionist at the front desk said to her, you know, Lindsay, you just don't seem like yourself. You know, you usually come in here bubbly and happy. You know, what's going on? And my friend Linda broke down and, you know, cried, and 911 was called. It was a very, very, very stressful situation. But that receptionist, by asking that one question, you know, saved my friend's life probably. I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe she would have gotten help someplace else. But like she said, that 50-pound weight loss in a matter of a couple of weeks was her crying out for help. She comes from a family and a culture where you don't talk about your problems, especially after she worked so hard to have a baby. She had the baby later on in life. She should be happy. Why wasn't she happy? And so I always use that as an example, because you never know. You know, we have to be alert. We have to be aware of the people in our lives. We're so used to just staying in our lane and not, interfering with people, so that we all know that we can be potentially the person that it makes the difference between life and death.